The Conjuring, 2013, is a supernatural horror film that quickly became one of the most iconic of its genre. It was based on real-life paranormal investigations conducted by Ed and Lorraine Warren, a husband and wife duo renowned for their work in the field of demonology and ghost hunting. The story of The Conjuring takes place in the early 1970s and follows one of the Warrens' most terrifying cases, the haunting of the Perron family in their remote farmhouse in Harrisville, Rhode Island. The events surrounding this case were so harrowing that even the Warrens, who had faced countless supernatural occurrences, considered it one of the most intense and dangerous experiences of their careers. #The Beginning, A New Home, A Dark History. In January 1971, Roger and Carolyn Perron, along with their 5 daughters, moved into a 14-room farmhouse nestled in the quiet countryside of Harrisville. The family was looking for a fresh start, a place where they could grow and thrive away from the hustle and bustle of city life. However, from the moment they set foot on the property, an unsettling feeling seemed to hang over the house, an oppressive heaviness that only grew stronger with time. The farmhouse, unbeknownst to the Perrons, had a dark history that stretched back centuries. Originally built in the 18th century, the house had seen its share of tragedy and death, with multiple suicides, drownings, murders, and other mysterious occurrences marking its past. Among the most infamous was Bathsheba Sherman, a woman who was rumored to have been a witch. Bathsheba had lived in the farmhouse during the 19th century and was accused of performing dark rituals, including the sacrifice of her infant child to the devil. Though she was never formally convicted, local legend held that she cursed the land and all who would come to live on it. Signs of trouble. The paranormal activity began innocuously enough. Objects moved on their own, strange noises echoed through the halls, and cold spots appeared in rooms without explanation. The Perron daughters often felt like they were being watched, and the youngest began to speak of an invisible friend who would play with her. At first, these occurrences were dismissed as quirks of an old house settling, but the manifestations grew increasingly sinister. One night, as the family was preparing for bed, they heard a series of loud bangs coming from the basement, as if someone was forcefully knocking on the walls. Roger investigated but found nothing out of the ordinary, except for an icy coldness that seemed to seep into his bones. Soon, the activity escalated to the point where the children began to see apparitions, ghostly figures that wandered the house at all hours. Some appeared benign, but others seemed filled with malice. One particularly menacing spirit was that of a woman who would stare at the girls while they slept, her head tilted at an unnatural angle, her eyes filled with malevolence. Haunting intensifies, Bathsheba makes her presence known. It became clear that there was one spirit in particular that held dominion over the house, a dark and twisted entity that had taken a particular interest in Carolyn. The entity's presence became most palpable when the mother was alone. Carolyn began experiencing sharp pains throughout her body, often accompanied by the sensation of being poked or stabbed with a needle. This drew a terrifying parallel to the story of Bathsheba, who was said to have died by hanging after being accused of stabbing an infant to death with a sewing needle. The connection between the haunting and Bathsheba's legend seemed undeniable. The attacks on Carolyn grew increasingly physical and violent. She would wake up with mysterious bruises on her body, often in the shape of small hands. During one harrowing incident, Carolyn was thrown across the room by an unseen force. The children, too, were not spared. They were frequently dragged out of bed, their hair pulled, and at times they would see grotesque faces appear in the shadows. The family's dog, who had seemed uneasy from the start, barked furiously at empty corners and refused to enter certain rooms. The house was no longer a home, it had become a prison of fear. Ed and Lorraine Warren arrive. Desperate and terrified, the parents sought help from Ed and Lorraine Warren, a pair of seasoned paranormal investigators who had already built a reputation for handling some of the most disturbing hauntings in America. Lorraine was a gifted clairvoyant, capable of perceiving spirits and sensing their presence, while Ed was a demonologist with extensive knowledge of the occult. The Warrens agreed to investigate the farmhouse and arrived in late 1971. From the moment Lorraine stepped into the house, she sensed a dark energy that permeated every room. She was particularly drawn to the cellar, where the oppressive atmosphere seemed strongest. During their initial walkthrough, Lorraine had a vision of malevolent spirits lurking around the property, including the sinister figure of Bathsheba. She felt a powerful and overwhelming darkness centered around Carolyn, as if the entity had chosen her as its primary target. Investigation, evidence of the supernatural. The Warrens, along with their team of investigators, set up recording devices, cameras, and other tools throughout the house to capture evidence of the paranormal activity. What they documented was nothing short of chilling: disembodied voices, sudden temperature drops, and objects moving on their own. The evidence seemed to confirm that the Perron farmhouse was indeed infested with multiple spirits, with Bathsheba being the most dominant. Lorraine spoke with the Perron children and listened to their accounts of ghostly encounters. Each story added a new layer of horror to the investigation. The eldest daughter recounted an experience where she had been attacked in her sleep by an unseen force, leaving her breathless and frozen in terror. Lorraine herself witnessed a chair move across the room with no one touching it and felt invisible hands grab at her while she tried to pray. As the investigation continued, it became clear that the spirit of Bathsheba was not merely a lost soul but something far more malevolent, possibly even demonic. It seemed intent on driving the family to despair and ultimately possessing Carolyn. Lorraine had a vision in which she saw Bathsheba standing over Carolyn's bed, chanting in an ancient language and holding a long needle in her hand, preparing to sacrifice her to the darkness. A battle for Carolyn's soul. Recognizing the severity of the situation, Ed and Lorraine decided that the only way to cleanse the house was through an exorcism. Although they were not licensed to perform the exorcism themselves, they sought the help of a Catholic priest. The ritual was risky, as exorcisms could provoke the entity to become even more aggressive. Yet, there was no other choice. Carolyn's life, and possibly the lives of her children, were in grave danger. During the exorcism, Bathsheba's wrath reached its peak. The air in the room turned frigid, and a suffocating pressure seemed to bear down on everyone present. As the priest recited the rites, Carolyn's body convulsed violently. She let out blood-curdling screams, her voice distorted into something inhuman. The furniture rattled, objects flew across the room, and at one point, Carolyn was lifted off the ground, her body twisting in midair as if controlled by an unseen force. Ed and Lorraine joined the priest in prayer, urging the entity to release its hold. For what felt like an eternity, the battle raged on, with Carolyn teetering on the edge of consciousness. Just as it seemed the dark force would not relent, a sudden calm washed over the room. Carolyn collapsed to the floor, exhausted but alive. The dark presence receded, though it did not disappear entirely. The house was no longer its primary home, but the lingering sense of dread remained. Aftermath, the legacy of the Perron haunting. Following the exorcism, the intensity of the paranormal activity diminished, though the family would still occasionally experience strange events. They continued to live in the farmhouse for several years before eventually moving away. Carolyn, though free from Bathsheba's direct influence, was left scarred both physically and emotionally by the ordeal. The Warrens, too, carried the weight of the case with them, regarding it as one of the most terrifying experiences they had ever encountered. The story of the Perron family's haunting and the Warrens' involvement later became the basis for The Conjuring, which brought their harrowing ordeal to the big screen. The film captivated audiences worldwide, not only because of its chilling depictions of supernatural horror but also due to its basis in real-life events. The movie stayed true to the essence of what the Perrons and the Warrens had experienced, offering a glimpse into a world where darkness does not just lurk in the shadows, it hunts. For Ed and Lorraine Warren, the Conjuring case was far from their last, but it served as a reminder of the unseen battles waged every day against forces that defy understanding. It was a testament to the resilience of one family who refused to surrender to fear and the enduring fight of two investigators committed to uncovering the truth, no matter how dark it might be.